Hello and welcome to the Quick Timeout with Sean Carroll. I'm Sean Carroll and this is the Quick Timeout, and today I'll be talking about the Atlanta Hawks, who are finally going to be going, hopefully, in a different direction. The Atlanta Hawks have signalled to the league that they're going to operate as sellers this trade deadline, with every player on the roster available except for Trae Young and Jalen Johnson. This coming from Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports. And I think this is just the thing that they need. It's late, but it's just the thing that the Atlanta Hawks need, because Trae Young isn't an MVP level guard at the moment, but he's a fringe All-NBA talent that has proven it for multiple years now. And despite having this guy on their roster, the Hawks have just struggled to make really meaningful and consistent runs to the playoffs. And I think the play-in has been a bit of a saviour for them, so they can at least save face and say that, hey, we're playing games that start with play, and they get out of the play-in or whatever it may be. But it's just not enough. And the only time that they did make some real noise in the postseason, it was in 2021, where they beat an overachieving Knicks team in the first round, and then just happened to be in the right place at the right time when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid Philly team just imploded. Since then, short-sighted trades and no real offensive or defensive identity has forced this team right onto the treadmill of mediocrity. They were once a team that just looked like they were actually going places, but ended up not going anywhere. As I speak, Atlanta is 6 games under 500, and while they're playing better under Quinn Snyder than they were under Nate McMillan, being 6th in offense but 26th in defense, and they have a negative 0.5 point differential per cleaning the glass, which puts them 20th in the league. That offensive number is great, but it's clearly not enough to paper over their horrible defense. And we've seen some teams that have been exceptional at one end of the ball, and they're able to hopefully to jump into playoff contention, but this team is not one of them. But it's okay to be a one-dimensional team, especially if you're still considering yourself to be growing. But the Hawks at the moment have an aging core, and they're one-dimensional, but the one dimension isn't good enough to make up for the lack of the other dimension. And I think there's 2 molds that they can go from here if they are going to retool, which they say they're going to retool around Trae Young and Jalen Johnson, but let's just call it Trae Young. So 2 molds for this are the early Jokic Denver Nuggets and the current Tyrese Haliburton Indiana Pacers. The Nuggets slowly realized that Nikola Jokic was a player to build around, and they consistently made the playoffs with the top 10 offense, but then never really had that good of a defense. But when it came time to push the chips in, they brought in players that complement Jokic on offense while also greatly helping their defense in KCP and Aaron Gordon. It also helped that Mike Malone is a great defensive coach, and he was able to get Jokic to buy in and try really hard on that end while building their defensive schemes all around him. And then the Indiana Pacers this season have the best offense in the league and are 28th in defense via cleaning the glass at the time of this recording. And that's not great, but it's fine. And I'm sure the Pacers front office, and honestly Pacers fans, are fine spending this season just watching this fun, fast team make the playoffs with maybe a top 6 seed before honing the roster in years to come and off seasons to come around the young star with all of their available picks, all their young players to move, and just sort of the team's good, and there's not much pressure to be any better than that right now because they've got the time. Whereas the Hawks looked good. They looked in the position that the Pacers are in right now, and then said, okay, well, let's push everything in. We'll trade for Clint Capella. We'll sign Danilo Gallinari. But for the Hawks to reach these offensive heights and become that team that is one-dimensional and then hope to hone it in years to come, they need to decide right now if they're going to retool around Trae and make a push right now, or, as Jake Fisher mentions in the report, if they're going to tear everything down this season, get a high pick in this year's draft and either draft someone and develop them, do a 2 windows-ish thing, or then trade that high pick and hopefully get a player that can contribute right now and start hoping for results in the 2024-25 season, which is when the San Antonio Spurs control their draft after the DeJounte Murray trade. And just for reference there, the Hawks own their 2024 first-round pick, but San Antonio own their 25 and 27 picks outright with the right to swap in 2026. But in my opinion, Trae is just too good for this team to tank. If Atlanta is able to move on from all of their larger salaries and pretty much everything on the core and play out the rest of the season with Trae, Jalen Johnson, a bunch of role players, they're not going to be as bad as Detroit, Washington, Charlotte, Portland, and San Antonio. And just with those teams below them, assuming they do blow it up, let's say tomorrow morning, they're going to be sixth. They were on lottery night. They would enter with the sixth best odds at the top pick, and currently there are actually a couple of teams below them anyway. So it would be too hard to tank that hard. And I know flatten lottery odds, but it's not going to be a true bottom out. And I don't think any team that like guts their team halfway through the season can really bottom out that well. So is it worth it? I'm not sure, but if the end goal is to tank for a bad pick and then trade the pick anyway, then why not just trade the pick this season? You're a mediocre/bad team right now, so why don't you just trade the pick that will end up being the bad pick? It would have to be the rights to swap due to the Stepien rule, but instead of going one way, I'm really not a big fan of just throwing good money after bad. But in this scenario where you literally have nothing going on in the future, why wait until the off-season to retool your team? See if you can retool the team during the season. In a minute, I'll run through some of the players that are on the trade market and see if they can make for good trade targets. But just so you know, I'll be looking at ways to enhance this Trae Young team right now and look at ways that you can help really make the most of what Trae Young is doing on offense and hopefully help him out on the defensive end, which, like the Jokic comparison, might actually come down to Trae himself trying on that end and maybe going for that Steph Curry thing where it is you're undersized, you're weaker than your opponent, but at least you try and at least you hedge out really hard. But that is a problem for the future. The Atlanta Hawks tried to do this with the pairing with DeJounte Murray, but it's just not a smooth fit. And while there is a lot of benefit to having 48 minutes of good point guard play, the two just struggle to gel on the court when they're on the court at the same time. So like DeJounte likes to operate with the ball in his hands, and when he is doing what DeJounte does, he is operating out of the pick and roll, and he is doing what he can to look for a shot, which is mostly in the mid-range. That's what he's done in his career in San Antonio and now briefly in Atlanta. And Trae helps with that. Like Trae was never really an off-ball mover, but then he sort of turned into an off-ball guy when Murray came, and that's great, cool. DeJounte Murray's running off a screen, Trae's maybe running off an off-ball screen, he can stretch the floor, but the juice just isn't really worth the squeeze because Trae's the better offensive player, so you may as well put the ball in Trae's hand and have Trae do what he can do. But then it's like, oh, okay, well, flipping the roles, DeJounte Murray can't stretch the floor, and DeJounte Murray can't do to Trae what Trae can do when Murray's got the ball. Pair that with Capella, a player who can't score unless he's practically touching the ring, and the spacing just really cramps down on Trae. And Trae's one of the best passers in the league, despite this lack of spacing that he's been working with. And I will mention that he was working with this lack of spacing as well when John Collins was there, and that sort of led to teams just ignoring John Collins altogether and really shrinking the floor. And we saw that he was essentially traded for a second-round pick and Rudy Gay. So Trae's one of the best passers in the league, and he has a 44.8 assist percentage and a slightly dangerously high 13.3 turnover percentage. But imagine what he can do if there's more space to operate, and it's all about Trae, and it's not about sharing the ball with another guy who is a good point guard but not great enough to have the offense focused around him. So I would like to see in this potential retool, the Hawks try and create a bit of a Houston James Harden ecosystem for Trae. So stretching the floor out as much as they can, just give him one pick and roll partner, which, going back to the report, is probably going to be Jalen Johnson, which, Jalen Johnson is shooting 41% from three, but it's 3 shots a night. It's something to work on. I mean, it's not the worst sign in the world, but I think that is the theory of this team. That's the best that this team could get. So with that in mind, I'll be looking at possible trades to focus on a real Trae-centric offense. But I'll start most of these trade conversations, and I'll run through 3 of the players that are on the Hawks that could be traded at the deadline, and I'll try and keep the receiving team in mind. So jumping on the trade machine, and I'm sure I could easily find matching salary for Clint Capella, but is it really worth it for the Boston Celtics to do it, for example? But start off with DeJounte Murray, the first player that the Hawks need to look at moving, and as we've mentioned, he is an uncomfortable fit at best and should have the most value in the trade market. But despite having the most value for the Hawks this trade deadline, I don't think that he's going to get anywhere near the haul that they actually gave up for him, which was 3 really good first-round picks and fine matching salary in Danilo Gallinari, who just expired and got waived. But usually front offices are too scared to admit defeat in a big trade or signing and just sort of keep going on and on and on with this thing that just probably shouldn't happen. They should just cut their losses. But we're dealing with a not Quinn Snyder-led front office, but a Quinn Snyder heavily influenced front office. And he wasn't the guy who traded for DeJounte Murray. So I don't think there's going to be those same ties where Snyder was the guy who traded for Murray and then was like, oh, I'm going to make it work so I don't look like I made a bad move. I think Quinn Snyder's coming in as a neutral who's like, okay, this doesn't work. He has no emotional ties in terms of like just making the move for DeJounte Murray, so he may as well trade him, which is good because I think a lot of teams would start to look at a move and say, oh, we stuffed up. Let's change the course of action, as opposed to we stuffed up. Not my fault. It's because it was raining that day, so he didn't hit his shots, and then just keep digging yourself a bigger hole. Side note, one of the reasons why Quinn Snyder decided to join the Hawks mid-season last year rather than wait into the off-season and shop around for destinations was because the power that the front office granted him, well, the power to sway the front office was granted to him in Atlanta. And it must have been a big enough draw for him. We know that he had a bit of a ugly ending in Utah because there was a power struggle between the new front office and Quinn Snyder, who was sort of creeping his fingers into the front office, and he lost that power struggle and he left. So this is important to him. Let's see what he can get for DeJounte Murray. So the first team that came to mind in a DeJounte Murray trade was the Miami Heat. And there's a trade that works that just simply swaps him for Kyle Lowry, but he's expiring at the end of the season. I don't think the Heat want to trade Kyle Lowry, even though they've kind of wanted to trade him for the past couple of years, because I think they want to hold out on his salary for a bigger fish. So if there is a trade out there that they can keep the powder dry for that Damian Lillard package of Tyler Hero and whatever picks they can move, I think they want to keep the Kyle Lowry salary spot there, just if they can get, let's say, a $40 million player or $40 to $50 million player. But a trade that I think works for both sides is DeJounte Murray for Duncan Robinson and Jaime Hackers Jr., Triple J for those who don't know him. And I still don't know if the Miami Heat do this, and it might even take the Atlanta Hawks offering a pick swap in this year's draft to get that move done. So Murray operates a lot in the same spaces as Jimmy Butler on offense, but the main draw here for the Miami Heat would be that the defense is incredible. Like Murray's best strength, in my eyes, on defense is guarding opposing point guards and being able to outmuscle and outlength, if that's a word, opposing point guards. And this move would put him back on point guards where somewhere where he hasn't been for the past year and a half, sharing a backcourt with Trae Young, while Jimmy and Bam Adebayo make for just a terrorizing three-headed defensive monster. Like that's something that a team could bank on. Doesn't fix their offensive woes, but I don't know. Do they want to make a move just to make a move, or do they want to keep the team and just say, oh, well, we just missed out on a Damian Lillard type trade? For the Hawks, this would be all about adding length and shooting and betting on a tiny, tiny sample size from Triple J, but adding size, shooting, hustle, and length to go alongside a Trey-centric offense would be good. I don't know how much Duncan Robinson adds, but it's worth a look. The next move I thought of would be to lap up the matching salary that Golden State might send out in a move, if they are to make a move. So if the Warriors do make a move for Pascal Siakam, Larry Markkanen, Karl-Anthony Towns, whoever it may be, and those three names are probably the wrong names, but I'm just saying them, the salary going out is probably going to be Andrew Wiggins alongside Jonathan Kuminga and or Moses Moody. So using that Siakam trade as an example, if it is Siakam for Kuminga and Moody and Andrew Wiggins, something that I will say doesn't seem likely because it looks like Sacramento Kings are winning in that front, you would assume that Wiggins is negative salary, and he's on a deal that he's on the first year of a deal that's roughly $100 million across the next 4 years. And could the Hawks sneak in here and try and buy low on Wiggins' future? Like, it was only 2 calendar years ago, that he was a championship level wing who was like shooting very well from three and playing off ball dominant stars. So maybe a fresh start on a fast Hawks team is just what he needs to find his groove. And for the Hawks, and I forgot to mention that trading Wiggins would be trading for DeJounte Murray. So for the Hawks, you wouldn't need to attach any other assets to grab Wiggins' salary wherever he ends up, because we're calling it negative, I think. And then for the Raptors, they could hypothetically turn Siakam into Kuminga, Moody, and DeJounte Murray, or they can turn Siakam into, entering young talent that they get from a team and then flip that young talent for DeJounte Murray. Like, yes, they might have just traded for their future point guard and Emmanuel Quickley, but in a very bad way, trading for DeJounte Murray as the matching salary, or turning your matching salary in Pascal Siakam to DeJounte Murray, only increases their leverage in restricted free agency against IQ, which sucks to say, but I mean, it would definitely help their chances there. But going back to this potential Wiggins buy low, to make the money work, the Hawks would also have to take on 2 years of Kevon Looney's deal. And then a final potential team in a DeJounte Murray trade, funnily enough, is the San Antonio Spurs, because they need playmaking and they need defense in a bad way. But I couldn't come up with a trade that works. So maybe just if the Hawks call the Spurs and ask really, really, really nicely and be really polite, they could ask for their picks back. But I wouldn't bet on it. The next most tradable player on the Hawks is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's one of the quietest performers in the league this year. So at the moment, he's averaging a career-high 18 points a night on 43, 37, and 91 shooting splits. He's taking just under 9 3-pointers a night. And he also just signed a 4-year, $68 million contract extension last season that I had actually forgotten about until I started researching for this podcast. But the 31-year-old guard is on, he's 31 years old, so the back end of that contract isn't great, but he might be the definition of a serviceable shooting guard that pretty much every team / every contender could just use. So I'm looking around the league trying to find teams that need scoring and shooting and might miss out on some of the bigger fish because some of the best scorers and shooters are already on the trade market. The first team that came to my mind is the Orlando Magic, and they're in a bit of a funk at the moment, losing 6 of their past 10 games and struggling to do really much with the injuries to the good Wagner, Franz, and their playmakers in Markelle Fultz and Joe Ingles. Bogdanovic isn't a great playmaker, but he's an off-the-dribble scorer that the Magic really need. The Magic, even at full strength, don't have that much shooting and don't have that much off-the-dribble shooting. So bring in Bogdanovic, who can operate with some of their good role players, but also just, if Paolo gets doubled, he can pass out to a dude who's just going to catch and shoot and be good. And we would give Jamal Mosley plenty of different plenty of lineup versatility both now and when the team's at full strength. Money-wise, in a trade, a Bogdan for Gary Harris trade works straight up, but the Hawks would need more than just an injury-riddled, undersized wing. Also, Harris isn't expiring at the end of the year, so if the Magic do have big free agency aspirations, cough, cough, Donovan Mitchell, cough, cough, they'd have to have some serious conversations later about then salary dumping one or more of Bogdan, John Isaac, and Joe Ingles this offseason, rather than just letting Harris walk. And then it's a conversation of, do you wave and stretch John Isaac or wave and stretch Joe Ingles, as opposed to now, are we going to trade away Bogdan, who we just traded a first-round pick for? But, I mean, really, the league's full of tampers, so can they just wink, figure it out? And if they don't get a wink back from Donovan Mitchell that he might entertain them in free agency, should they just sort of settle for a B option in Bogdan Bogdanovic? But if so, the Hawks don't really address their defensive woes, because in my eyes, I see Gary Harris as another dude whose best defensive position is at the 1, but he's also not a 1 on offense. But I mean, at least Gary Harris can shoot when he's healthy. But if it does take an asset for the Orlando Magic to get Bogdan Bogdanovic here, so if the Magic have to throw in maybe a very lightly predicted first-round pick, that could be something that the Hawks could then look elsewhere and hopefully bundle that into a bigger deal, maybe. That's good, I guess. Another team is the Los Angeles Lakers, who are always on the lookout for scoring and ball handling, possibly to their detriment. But Bogdan is good enough off the ball to positively impact LeBron James, Anthony Davis team. And there's a few machinations of the Lakers trade. And the first is just a straight swap with D'Angelo Russell, and the second is for Rui Hachimura and Gabe Vincent. We can talk about picks going either way, however that worked, but the Lakers' picks are far out in the future. So are they going to throw away a 29 or 30 first-round pick just to get off Gabe Vincent, or get off fine contracts in Rui and D'Lo for a 31-year-old? And also, neither of those packages really help the Hawks starting lineup. So if you look at all those great James Harden teams, they all had flexible backup guards / lead ball handlers that would come off the bench play alongside Harden, but also in the 8 to 10 minutes that Harden's sitting on the bench, they could just take the reins as the primary ball handler. So guys like Eric Gordon, Gerald Green, and Chris Paul just really fit perfectly next to James Harden. So if that's going to be the theory for the a Trae Young centric like potential pseudo James Harden team, wouldn't you be better off just keeping Bogdanovic on your team and just keeping the better player on your roster? I'm asking that if the trades are for a D'Lo or for a Rui, as opposed to just keeping him if you're not going to get any assets in a trade. Other potential Bogdanovic destinations, the Detroit Pistons are apparently buyers at the deadline, but they've got nothing to sell, God help them. They could pair the Bogdanovic-Knott brothers. The Kings are apparently shopping Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell, and Kevin Huerter, but they've got bigger aspirations, and it's looking like they're going to be employing Pascal Siakam very soon. Plus, they've already got Malik Monk to do the exact same thing that Bogdanovic does. And I really looked at trying to get Bogdan onto the Denver Nuggets, but there's no way to make the money work without breaking up that starting lineup, and that's just a non-starter. So in terms of Bogdanovic trades, it might just be better for the Hawks to keep him. And look, he's been happy coming off the bench, and I assume he'll continue to be happy coming off the bench. He signed an extension with this team, so maybe Bogdanovic doesn't get moved in this big Hawks fire sale. And finally, Clint Capella. Clint Capella is maybe the hardest piece to move, but a player who could have the most addition by subtraction for the Hawks. He is 29 years old, but man, he just does what he does, and he does it at such a league average level, and that's so fine. But they just need something else. Like it's clearly not working. They're 6 games under 500, and they just, as we mentioned at the top of the pod, they haven't made any real impact in the playoffs outside of Ben Simmons flaming out. Clint Capella is not the athlete that he was when he was running and dunking for, funnily enough, James Harden. He's not an elite rim protector, and he's not versatile enough to let you do anything other than just play in a drop coverage. And since Jalen Johnson is considered untouchable according to the initial report, the Hawks already have their pick and roll in capital letters partner for Trae Young. So you would need, assuming you want 4 shooters on the court at all times, and Jalen Johnson's maybe a shooter, it's getting hard to rationalize having just a ground-bound big in a Clint Capella type if he's not going to elevate you to one of the league's best defenses. On top of that, the team drafted Onyeka Okongwu 6th in the 2020 draft, and they just extended him for 4 years. The Hawks do some really quiet extensions. Did you know DeJounte Murray has a 5-year extension after this? But yeah, so they've got Onyeka Okongwu to hopefully fill the backup center spot when Capella's gone. So it's like, it's all there. The writing's on the wall. I've talked about this on podcasts before, but this is the time. So the problem is, it's really hard to trade a declining big man who's going to turn 30 and is owed just over $22 million next year. Like, it's very hard. And there isn't a natural trade partner that would just simply want to take on his money. In the past, on the Deep 2 NBA podcast, I've talked about getting a Clint Capella or just any of these average big men to the Charlotte Hornets, just so the Hornets aren't just cycling through like failed draft prospects and can at least get LaMelo Ball just a pick and roll partner. But the clock's running out. Like it's not like Clint Capella's going to get more athletic. Also, side note, on YouTube a couple of years ago, I got recommended some videos of Clint Capella going to his chiropractor. And he goes to one of those chiropractors that just, maybe this is all of them, but just pops your muscles and pops your joints really loudly. And apparently he goes like once a week or once a fortnight, and they just pop all of his joints. Not sponsored by the Houston Rockets whatsoever. It's just this famous chiropractor in America who just happens to get all these sports people, and that just doesn't scream longevity. It's not like when you hear, oh, hey, did you hear Kyle Lowry's vegan? And then all the front office was like, oh, here's the taxpayer mid-level exception, the Jeff Green, if you will. It's like, oh, did you hear Clint Capella goes to a chiropractor once a week to pop his shoulder? Oh, here's a league minimum maybe. But back on track. The first team that I thought of is the Portland Trail Blazers, and it would be, this deal is all about bringing in Robert Williams and just hoping that he'll be healthy. So the Hawks can send Clint Capella to Portland for Rob Will and one small salary to make the money work. So you can pick between Moses Brown and Ish Wainwright. I don't care. But one of those guys plus Rob Will for Clint Capella. So Williams is out for the rest of the season. So if the front office wants to tank, if the Hawks are set on trying to get, let's just call it the 6th pick for now, he definitely helps with that because he won't be on the court. And when he is healthy, if he's at full strength, he's a massive upgrade over Clint Capella. So he has a lot of the same problems where he lacks the versatility and he lacks the spacing on offense, but Time Lord, when he's healthy, is a fringe Defensive Player of the Year candidate who might have even actually won an award if it wasn't for his health. But that health is just such a big question mark. But for the Blazers, they could look at this and think that they may as well be getting something for Rob Will, and maybe they can flip Capella next season. Capella at least has been healthy, so they could just trade Rob Williams for Clint Capella, and then this offseason they can just trade him to Team X for 2 second-round picks, or maybe next trade deadline when he's expiring, teams are going to be much more interested in just getting an expiring contract. But then also from the Blazers' point of view, this would be trading Rob Williams at the absolute nadir of his value. So if they do wait a year for Rob Will comes back, comes off the bench, turns out he's better than DeAndre Ayton, so then he just starts. He's at a Defensive Player of the Year level, which I think he can get to. Then it's much more fun to trade a potential Defensive Player of the Year than a guy who's out for the whole entire season. It's up to them where they want to do it. But the second more juicy trade that I found with Clint Capella involves sending Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter to the Memphis Grizzlies, while the Grizzlies send back Steven Adams, Brandon Clark, and Zion Williams to the Jazz, and the Hawks get Larry Markkinen and Kelly Olynyk. On top of this, the Jazz receive 1 pick from the Memphis Grizzlies. That could be this year or next year. I think the best way to word that would be a protected pick this year, maybe top 10, maybe playoff protected, because we know that the Grizzlies have a bad record because they were missing their starting point guard for a non-basketball reason. So the Jazz would get a pick from the Grizz this year, and the Hawks would send their 2024 plus their 2029 first-round pick to the Utah Jazz. So that would be their future gone. And if Markkinen is available, could the Jazz do better than 3 firsts, 2 tradable salaries in Adams and Clark, and a cheeky look at Zion Williams, who's not good? Maybe. For the Grizzlies, they lose a lot of pieces, but they consolidate them into a healthy big man for 2 years and 4 years of Hunter, who has underperformed since his high draft slot, but at the very least is better than any of the wings that the Memphis Grizzlies have right now. For the Atlanta Hawks, Olynyk helps stretch the floor for Trey and Johnson. I think he would be a great backup center for almost any team in the league, but Larry Markkinen would be a bona fide number 2 option next to Trey Young, and he doesn't get in the way on the offense. And I think Larry and Trey could really complement each other. I think it would be like a great 2-man game. Fits the whole Trey-centric offense, as well as just having like a good number 2 there for Trey. But if the Jazz are trading Larry Markkinen, which there was a report a couple of weeks ago that Larry wants to stay, if the Jazz do want to do it, it's like I think they could get a better deal elsewhere. But in terms of fits, if the Hawks can just mortgage all their future and any semblance of a wing, or young players, if they want to give up on Kobe Bufkin, I might have mispronounced his name, I would definitely do that. And that would be one retool that would just be excellent for the Atlanta Hawks. But in conclusion, it's great that the Hawks have decided to make this change. It's definitely needed. Unfortunately for them, they can't fully tear it down because Trey would just make them too good to bottom out, and it would only be bottoming out for a year because the Spurs own their future. So I've talked a lot about a Trey-centric team, but there is no way to have a non-Trey-centric team, because if they do, let's say, trade him to the Lakers, for example, then it's like, well, what are you doing? Because you don't have your own first-round picks, and the Spurs are just going to get all the benefits of that tank. But retooling around an established star is really, really hard to do, and they're trying to retool with little to no assets in a very competitive trade market. So if any trade candidate does become available, like let's say Larry Markkinen changes his mind and says, that's it, Utah, I need to go, get me out of here, the Hawks, I'm sure, would call and say, do you want 2 first-round picks and a couple of young players, and we can work out some salary stuff. But the Thunder, the Pelicans, well, I've written down the Jazz, that doesn't make any sense, but the Thunder and the Pelicans are 2 teams that already have lots of first-round picks from their own teardowns, where they traded away an Anthony Davis, or they traded away, Paul George. The Thunder traded away everyone, but these teams are just going to outbid everyone 100% of the time. So it's really hard. The Hawks need to work on the edges if they do want to retool on the fly. They need to work around the edges to hopefully bring in players that are undervalued, that are undervalued by the rest of the league, like an Andrew Wiggins, or maybe like a Kevin Huerter again. Bring him back, even though you know that it doesn't work defensively. But just bring in these guys that you hope can be better than they're valued, and then hope that Trae Young can take a step forwards, and still you won't be good on defense. That's also assuming that Onyeka Okongwu is ready to be the full-time starting center, and at 6'8" in a league that's much taller than it was 4 years ago. That's hard. It's really hard to do. I wish them the best of luck, and I wish Quinn Snyder the best of luck. This is my message to Quinn Snyder. When he took the job understanding that the Hawks were in a bit of very much so in a treadmill of mediocrity. But he took the job knowing that he was going to get the most front office control that he could get. And best of luck. He knew this was coming, and I'm sure he was part of the people or part of the team that leaked this report that the Hawks are going to be sellers at the deadline. And Quinn Snyder, I wish you the best of luck rebuilding this team. There's the chance that the Hawks are really fun to watch with Trae Young running the show, averaging 35 million points and shooting 1,000,000% and taking 15 threes a game. It's just really hard to do. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Quick Timeout. I hope you enjoyed it. And the new year is in. This is 2024, year 5 for the Deep 2, and year 2, I guess, the Deep 2 Podcast Network. And far out, we've got so much content coming. So make sure you're subscribed to wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you're already subscribed and you haven't, make sure you give us a 5-star review if you think we deserve it, or if you just want to help us out. And follow us on all the socials, and subscribe to the newsletter. And you can find our newsletter on our website. Whoa, what's our website? God, this is much less charismatic when you're just bouncing off yourself, but it's so simple. It's thedeep2.com. So yeah, we're coming at you with plenty of content, plenty of times, a lot of times of the week. And I hope you enjoy it. And as always with these quick timeouts, if there's anything that you thought was good, bad, indifferent, let me know. I'm still trying to figure out how to solo pod, so that would be wonderful. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.
This episode of The Deep 2 is presented by Gelateria Bicco, the official gelato of The Deep 2. Gelateria Bicco, handmade gelato in the heart of Brunswick.
You want to talk WNBA? Maybe some WNBL? Australian Opals chat? Heck, even dabble in some EuroLeague? Find the W Basketball Show on the Deep 2 Podcast Network.